Hello, my name's Ruth.
And I'm Shawn.
And welcome to this Creative Engineering Engagement Workshop supported by RS Grassroots.
So today we're going to be talking about a few different things. We're going to be talking about why STEM engagement, engineering engagement matters. We're going to be talking about how you can go about doing it. And we're going to be talking about some practical tips and possibly some mistakes that people might make when they're trying to do engagement.
So here's a little bit about us. My name is Ruth. I'm an inventor, engineer, entrepreneur and YouTuber. I fell into the world of engineering when I was 16. I was Young Engineer for Britain in 2006. And I very nearly didn't become an engineer, and since then I've made it my mission to show how exciting science, technology, engineering and maths is, so that more young people feel that they could become engineers or inventors or scientists.
So I'm Shawn Brown and I am a renewable energy engineer by training, so I've trained in sort of wind and solar power and electric vehicles and stuff. I've also designed various energy products, and I've worked on building kind of lots of different crazy contraptions, including something called the Man Engine, which is the UK's largest mechanical puppet. And me and Ruth worked together on something called Kids Invent Stuff.
Now, Kids Invent Stuff is an engineering engagement project. It's hosted on YouTube, and every month we ask 4 to 11-year-olds to send in invention ideas as pictures or videos, and then we choose one to bring to life.
So we've built all sorts of things, all sent in by kids. We've built 70 kids' invention ideas to date. Everything from crazy ride on unicorns that poop jelly beans to crazy cars with seats that lift up the back so you can ride along the roof of the car. And
our challenges are often to solve problems or to create something new. We have asked for things like superhero inventions. So this is 10-year-old Jasmine's slime-firing gauntlets, and they were part of our superhero gadget challenge.
We've also built things like this, which is one of our most popular videos. This is 11-year-old Lila's idea for a popcorn-firing doorbell.
Now, within Kids Invent Stuff, we're able to talk to young people and adults about how you make things, how you design things, what happens when things go wrong when you're trying to make things. And so within Kids Invent Stuff, as entertainment videos, we're able to showcase lots of engineering and science and technology.
So that's partly the reason we're here today, is because that's what we do. We do creative STEM engagement, and we wanted to share a little bit about what we do with you today and to talk about some ways that you might be able to do more or new or different STEM engagement in the roles that you're in. So we wanted to start off by talking about why we actually want to do STEM engagement, why it's important to do engineering engagement in the first place.
So within the UK, we have a real need for more engineers and scientists. And one of the stats that is actually quite worrying is the fact that only 14% of engineers are women. Now, over the last few years, that has increased. So it's gone from 9% to 14%, but that is nowhere near what we need to have a diverse workforce.
So a big part of what we do on Kids Invent Stuff, and a big part of what wider individuals in the sort of STEM engagement field are hoping to do, is to bring more people into our field to show that what we do and our areas of work are inherently sort of fun and engaging and exciting, and that they are for everybody. So one really useful way to think about STEM engagement is the science capital approach.
This model is built on research which shows that although many people like and enjoy science at school, relatively few aspire to continue with science-related studies or careers, or feel comfortable in places where science is presented or discussed.
So Science Capital recognises the significance of what you know about STEM, how you think about it, what you do, and who you know when it comes to shaping your attitude and relationship with science and engineering.
And you can think of it almost like a rucksack that each person carries around with all of their STEM-related activities or experiences.
So each of us have a different amount of science capital that goes into our little rucksacks that we carry, and every time we're involved in any form of STEM engagement, we're basically adding to that science capital. We're building our understanding, we're building our view and our appreciation of engineering and science.
And research shows the more that we have in that backpack, the more activities we're involved with, the more we feel we understand science, the more that we feel that science is for us.
So that's why it's so important to do engineering engagement, and that's where we all come in.
So we apologise, this is the most depressing slide in the whole of this presentation.
But we live in a world that is full of problems that need to be solved, and it is partly down to us as engineers or people who work in engineering fields to help solve those problems, but also to inspire others to help solve them moving forwards.
So we as engineers working within this field, we have a responsibility. We are working at solving some of those problems, but we also have a responsibility to be part of the solution in the sense of talking to young people and educating and showing them how exciting engineering is and bringing them on board for the journey.
So as well as making YouTube videos, another big part of our work is visiting primary schools. So we go in, we give school assemblies, we do face-to-face classroom workshops and engagements with primary school kids. And a big part of what we're trying to communicate is that engineering is inherently something that's fun and creative, and that it relates to every aspect of the world around us. It's about solving problems and making things happen.
It's talking about the tools that we might use, like the physical tools, or the maths, or the science, the tech, or the art, the creativity, the problem solving.
We communicate to young people that engineers solve problems every single day. So any area you can imagine or you might have an interest in, from sport to music to fashion, there are jobs for engineers and scientists in those fields, solving problems that ultimately help make the world a better place every single day.
And whenever you're communicating that message to a particular group, in our case we do a lot of work with young people, it's important to relate that to the things that they really enjoy. So on our slides we often have pictures of things from movies, of food, of sports, things that will draw their attention and think, oh, I like this thing, maybe I might like science and engineering too.
And as well as a diversity of different themes, it's also really important that we go about our STEM engagement, our engineering engagement, with diversity at its core. So there's an overwhelming amount of research that shows the importance and the value of diversity when it comes to innovation. So in engineering, we're innovating, we're solving problems every day, and more diverse teams and more diverse STEM engagement ultimately means that we are innovating better moving forwards, and we are engaging more people in our field.
So how might we do this engagement?
So the most important starting point when we're doing any kind of engineering engagement is to identify our audience. So in our case, we make YouTube videos that are inspired by the invention ideas of 4 to 11-year-olds, but we make our videos for family viewing. So we're thinking about how parents, teachers, and kids ultimately will engage with our content. And that's really important when we're doing any kind of STEM engagement.
So when we think about STEM engagement, we might automatically just think about engaging young people, but actually STEM engagement happens at all ages. And it can be just as important to engage people within your workplace, your managers, your team, as it can be your clients, your shareholders. So STEM engagement doesn't just have to happen in a classroom. It can happen in our workplaces too. And sometimes explaining the engineering within projects, getting the buy-in from managers and team members can be just as important.
And the next important step when we're thinking about STEM engagement from a personal perspective is to start thinking about what we actually know. So what are the things that we personally are enthusiastic about and that we can share with the world, and what are the things that we actually want to communicate?
So here's an example of a project that we recently did. Obviously, on our channel, we build amazing, creative kids' invention ideas. But one of the other things that we're really excited about is musicals. When we're building in the workshop, we often have a little sing-along. We wondered if there was a way to combine those two things to communicate our engineering message through music. And so we started a project. We started with young people, we asked them questions, we then gave their answers about engineering to some very talented friend of ours who wrote some songs about engineering, and then we made an engineering musical.
It's okay. It just wasn't cool. To make mistakes. It's the only way to know what we know, and we'll always find a way. If at first we don't succeed, when we help the community, we must fail and fail along the way, and we'll get there in the end.
So that's an example of how we combine the things that we are excited and passionate about with our engineering knowledge.
So here are just a few examples of some of the different types of STEM engagement that people use. So we're here today talking to you, we're presenting to you, and when we're going into schools and visiting schools, often that's how we're going about initially engaging young people. We're talking to them, we're giving them examples of what we do, we're showing them kind of inspiring examples of engineering in the real world, and we're giving them opportunities to ask us questions, and that's like a really, really fundamental and exciting way of engaging with young people and indeed wider audiences around engineering.
Another way is STEM resources. So these might be resources to use in the classroom, they might be a paper resource, they might have some practical activity alongside them. The great thing about a STEM resource is that it can give a teacher confidence to teach something that maybe isn't their specialist subject or something they don't feel very confident with. They have everything they need in a worksheet, they can break down the steps, and they can do something fun with young people, and everyone can learn something new. These are a great way for companies and organisations organisations to tell people and show people what they do.
And the obvious example of STEM engagement that we're going to suggest is videos. That's a big part of what we do. So creating engaging and fun content for young people and wider audiences to engage with online or indeed in any other kind of video format is really powerful. So for us, the reason we started Kids Invent Stuff is because a whole lot of research many moons ago now showed that kids were now spending more time watching stuff on YouTube than they were on terrestrial TV. And we now all take that for granted that kids spend a lot of their time on YouTube, as do a more grown-up audience too. So actually creating really, really engaging and kind of exciting online video content is a really powerful way to engage around engineering.
And it's definitely worth organisations keeping up to date with that. So we're seeing a massive shift around STEM engagement on platforms such as TikTok or on Instagram. And I think whatever new platforms keep appearing, it's really important that organisations and those of us that want to engage with young people and adults are producing content for those platforms. And one of the other ways that we can do that is by actually hands-on workshops. So I'm involved in running hands-on welding workshops with young people, giving young people a chance to try something that they might not have the chance to do in the classroom. And workshops can be anything from chocolate welding through to having a go with some power tools, but actually practically trying to have a go at a skill or solving problems.
And on the subject of practical hands-on engineering engagement, another great way of doing that is through venues. So places like the Science Museum, who ultimately work with organisations and businesses and researchers to take information, take knowledge and to communicate it, often in practical hands-on way through exhibits or through displays or through activities within a fixed venue. So it's often worth bearing in mind that there are opportunities for organisations to work with these venues to reach a wider audience.
And it doesn't have to be just within these venues. Things like open days, opening up a business or an organisation to be able to have young people or adults inside to see what you do can also be just as valuable, as is conversations. So podcasts have grown massively over the last few years. There is a massive appetite for podcasts, for just audio content, and things like interviews or exploring different subjects can be really useful when it comes to young people and adults wanting to know what it's really like to do a job day to day.
So Ruth's being really humble because she did an amazing podcast where she interviewed lots of amazing people, asking them about engineering and making, and that was a really inspirational way for people to listen and find out more about engineering and the world of creating.
Now don't panic, you don't have to start a brand new initiative or plan it all yourself. There are already amazing people doing this work, probably in your local area. I know I'm very lucky to have something called Brightbox Makerspace literally on my doorstep, who do amazing work with young people and adults, and I'm able to support that work without having to be involved in designing a project or organising it. So getting involved in things that are already existing is a great way to help support within STEM engagement.
So that might be doing some collaboration with an existing organisation or business or venue, or it could be just going along and volunteering to find out about what they do and using that to inspire your own STEM engagement work.
Now for the practical part. Here's some of the practical things that we need to keep in mind when we're doing STEM engagement.
So a really good practical starting point is to be thinking about how we go about making the forms of engagement that we embrace things that are both accessible and fun. So one of our really favourite activities to do when we get asked to go and interact with, it could be kids, it could be people at events. One of the things we like to do is something called chocolate welding. So this is a really simple activity. You basically get a load of like the cheapest supermarket chocolate, and you get a container full of hot water or some way of melting that chocolate. And basically what you do is you set people a challenge of building the tallest tower out of melted chocolate. So they have to melt the chocolate together and build the tallest tower, and it's a competition. And it's a competition that everybody gets really excited about. They all get kind of caught up on, and everyone of all ages ultimately wants to have a go, maybe eat a bit of chocolate. There's a bit of a challenge there because if you eat the chocolate, then you're not going to get the tallest tower. So there's a bit of a kind of jeopardy involved as well, and stuff falls over. And that's a really good example of something that is accessible to everybody and really fun and really cheap as well to deliver on any kind of scale.
So start off by thinking about how you're going to make your activity accessible and fun. And a good way to think about this is the 3 to 90 test. Can someone who is 3 get something out of this? And can someone who is 90 get something out of this? This is something that we really spent a lot of time thinking about when we started Kids Invent Stuff. So we wanted young people to be able to engage, whether they had lots of fancy equipment in their school, whether they didn't. And so the great thing was drawing a picture or putting together a video. And we have inventions sent in on the back of receipts. We have beautiful CAD drawings. We have a whole scale. And it's something that a 4-year-old and an 11-year-old can produce. They can produce a drawing that's labelled and tell us about their invention. So when you're thinking about your engagement, think, what does a 3-year-old and a 90-year-old get out of this? But also, what is their understanding? You don't want it to be so complicated and that only actual engineers get this. You want to be able to be giving your message to people who aren't technically trained.
It's really important when we're communicating our engineering messages not to fall into habits that are specific to our fields. So we want to avoid jargon, we want to avoid any kind of abbreviations, and we want to ultimately use language that people can relate to and can feel like ultimately is for them. So when we're doing our videos, we like to steer clear from using any processes or any language that might make it feel like the thing we're doing is something that someone couldn't do themselves. And as in kind of engineering in a wider sense, we need to come away from some of those words, some of those terms that are very specific to our own particular specialist fields.
And sometimes we don't even realise that we're doing it. It's only by talking to non-technical people or presenting our work to friends or family members that we suddenly realise that a word or a phrase is not something that everyone uses or is aware of. So if you're wanting to do some sort of STEM engagement, it's definitely worth testing it on friends or family to make sure that you're not falling into some of these traps.
So journalism is actually a really interesting example of this technique, and it's actually something that quite a few different journalists will use if they're writing a story, is to take that story and give it to a grandparent or indeed one of their children to see if they understand the kind of gist or the flow of the sort of narrative that's being put across. And that same strategy can be really powerful when we're thinking about the stories that we tell when we're doing our engineering engagement.
So it's important to think about diversity in the sense of age or knowledge, but it's also really important to think about diversity in the different ways that our brains work. So Shawn and I are both dyslexic, and that has some very interesting pros and cons.
So dyslexia is an example of neurodiversity, so differences in the way that our brains process information, and this can include other things like autism or ADHD, so ultimately ways that people interact with information that's put across to them. And one of the things that we're trying to avoid when we are doing any kind of engagement or communication, regardless of people's age or ability, is not to give them too much information that you can create something that's called cognitive overloading. So cognitive overloading is when the amount of information you have to process exceeds your brain's ability to process it. So a classic example of this is like you might be sat in the car, you've got screaming kids in the back, or you're late for an appointment, or you're stressed about some bill you've got to pay. And we've all had that experience where it feels like a brick wall comes down. It feels like you just can't concentrate. Your brain is just like shutting down. Now we can all experience that, but for people with specific learning differences like dyslexia, the amount of information that's required before you reach that point, which it feels like your brain shuts down, can be much less. So we have to be really aware when we're putting information across that we're not giving people surplus information. We're not giving them stuff that isn't essential to the message, and that if people want more information, they can come and request it, rather than us bombarding them with technical terms or stuff that just isn't immediately relevant to the questions or the subject at hand.
So when it comes to this, there's some really practical things that we can do. So we can avoid white backgrounds when it comes to text. We can look at the fonts that we use and the amount of words that we put on a presentation or on a piece of paper. So we can make things accessible in that sense.
So the reason it's important to think about the backgrounds when it comes to text is that if you have black text on a white background, you can create something that's called visual stress, where words appear to blur and move on the page, which can be really distracting and make it really hard for some people to read some things.
It's also good if we're running things like workshops to take regular breaks.
A usual good rule of thumb is to have a 15-minute break after every sort of 3/4 of an hour of any kind of activity, so people aren't feeling sort of oversaturated.
And to keep things simple.
And the exciting thing when it comes to making our forms of engineering engagement kind of inclusive and open to everybody is that research tells us that if we make information accessible and the ways that we put across information accessible, ultimately that benefits everybody. So if text is legible, if it's communicated in a really accessible way, actually research tells us that makes it easier for everybody to read that information. It makes it easier for everybody to engage with the content you're putting across.
So here are a few of the useful tips and rules. Think about the text and the numbers that you use. You want them to be as little as is possible to get across your message. You don't want a page full of tables and stats that no one is going to read. It might be useful just to get down like what are the 3 points we want people to leave with, and then making sure that you use the least amount of text and numbers to get that across to people.
So we want to think about cutting the bullshit. If you're going into a shop and you see an advert in the window of that shop for a product, or you see the product itself, you're not being bombarded with like long blocks of text about its features and stuff. You're just being shown the product, you're being shown a pretty picture of it, you're being told its kind of key features, what it does, and ultimately those are the things that are going to make you want to buy it. And STEM engagement is exactly the same. We want to tell people what are the fun bits, what are the important stuff they need to know, and if they want to ask more questions to us, then they can do that and we can give them more information as and when they want it.
So think of it as like a set of steps. You want that person to take the first step, and then the next step, and then the next step, till they're at the top of that staircase. And they're only going to get there if they take it in little bits at a time. If you're showing them the whole set of stairs, they're going to be really overwhelmed by it. So think of that in the sense of your information, a little bit at a time, and really play to your enthusiasm and your knowledge. Because if we're excited about something, then that shows to other people and it brings them along for this exciting journey.
We've all seen examples of things on TV or podcasts and things when you're hearing an expert or someone who's knowledgeable about something communicating their interests or their passion or their knowledge, and it's infectious. When you've got someone who's really passionate about something and they're truly excited when they're communicating it, that is so infectious. It keeps people on side, it makes people want to know more, it makes people want to ask questions. So fundamentally, we all need to build on our experiences, our knowledge, and our enthusiasm for our own subjects.
And think about the story. This is what people are buying into. They want to know that story. We all watch popular TV shows, you know, lots of us watch David Attenborough, and what makes it so watchable is the story. We're all bought into what's happening with this creature and this journey that they're going on. And so think about that with our STEM engagement. What is the story that we're telling to people?
And research shows that people are more likely to buy in or to understand scientific concepts, or indeed to change their behaviours in relation to scientific research around things like climate change, if those things are communicated in the form of a story or a narrative structure. So this idea of having a story, or there being a good guy or a bad guy or a kind of moral journey to go on, those things can be really beneficial to people of all ages, rather than just going, this is the research, this is the science, or this is the engineering. Actually, giving that to people in the context of a story, or indeed not even just a specific story, but an analogy, can be a really powerful way of communicating things to people.
And because of what we do, we couldn't not go into detail on videos. We've been doing this for 5 years, we've made a lot of mistakes, and so we're going to share some of those with you so that you don't have to make those mistakes along the way.
So although we're enthusiasts for videos, one of the important first questions to ask if we're thinking about making video content is whether actually the thing we're trying to communicate is best placed to be in a video form in the first place. So we don't want to just jump straight in there and start taking one approach without thinking whether there are better options about the way we communicate.
Once we've decided that we do want to make a video, we want to think about the way that that looks and that sounds. So we want to make sure that in an ideal situation, we have great visuals and we have great sound. Now, everyone carries around, most of us, a really good phone camera in our pockets, but we want to make sure that whenever possible, that both the visual and the sound are great. Now, in a situation where you can only have one, people will switch off sooner if there is bad sound than if there is bad visuals. So make sure, whether it's, you know, you can buy a little plug-in lapel mic, whether you make sure you're close enough to the person that you're filming, but good sound is really important.
And on the subject of the things people say, a really great way of making sure your videos are accessible to people is captions. So one of the amazing things about creating video content today and putting it on a platform like YouTube is that we've got all these AI-driven softwares that are built into those platforms that can listen to the things that we say and can caption it. And then you can go onto YouTube when those captions have been generated and you can tweak them and change them. And those bits of software that are built into those platforms have got really good. So when we first started doing our videos, those bits of software really struggled with
Me, mainly. They were fine with Shawn, but as a northern female, they struggled. But they have got so much better. And also captioning is available on social media, so things like Instagram or TikTok, and putting those things on can really make your content accessible to a lot more people. Another thing to think about is attention span. So you want to plan out your video. Now, you might think, oh, I'm really excited about this thing that's happening. Maybe you're 3D printing something. This is a good example because this is a process that takes a long time. Now, people aren't going to sit and watch 3 minutes of 3D printing. So think about how you might creatively show that thing. Think about, can you speed up that footage? Can you cut bits of it out? But think about the attention span. A good test for us is we will often show our videos to very small people. And if they are engaged, if the music, if the movement is keeping them engaged, then we're like, yes, this works. Another thing might be using something as simple as pulling in on a shot. So, it's called Ken Burns effect, where you pull in on a little bit on a piece of footage or a picture, and making sure that that footage is moving is a really good way to keep the attention span.
So we mentioned earlier this idea of doing a kind of STEM volunteering, so going to schools or joining other kind of community projects. And actually there's a really interesting thing you can do in terms of if you're creating something in a work capacity for an organisation that you're working with and you want to try it out, actually just trying that out and getting the feedback from a wider audience can be a form of sort of STEM volunteering. So it might be that actually you go, okay, I've made this video, or we've kind of got this idea, we don't really know how we're going to test out whether it works. Actually, a great way of doing that might be to just go into a local school and have a conversation, or indeed go into a local care home and to just show the example of the thing that you're working on and get some feedback. And that in itself can be a form of engineering engagement.
So we know there's a lot to take in, but here are some next steps, some practical things for you to do.
So a great thing to take away with you today is to think about what is missing in your field. So what topics or themes do you feel like aren't being communicated enough or as effectively as you would like to see? And specifically that might be in relation to a particular audience. So what themes, what audience, what is missing?
And you don't have to leave and start some big STEM engagement initiative. You can start small and simple, one step at a time. Think about maybe there's a particular thing you're passionate about. Maybe you want to go and do more hands-on practical workshops. So start small, start simple, and also look at that collaboration. Is there someone already doing that, and can you help them and support them do that better?
And fundamentally, STEM engagement, engineering engagement, is about having conversations. So the simplest thing that you can do literally after you've watched this video is to go away and talk to people. So those might be kids, it might be people in your own family, it might be your spouse, it might be someone you've just met on a bus, but literally having a conversation around your area of work or the organisation you work for, or engineering or science themes in a wider sense, or even just something you've seen in the news. Actually having a conversation with somebody just in your everyday is a really, really powerful form of STEM engagement.
And with everything, practice makes perfect. So if you're wanting to go off and do STEM engagement, then the more you do it, the better you'll be. So if you do it once, you get feedback from that group of people, you feed that into your project or your activity, and it just gets better and better. So this is an area where practice does make perfect.
So here's an example of the way things have changed for us with practice. So here is a clip from one of the earliest videos that we made on our YouTube channel. Particularly take note of my delivery of some of the lines.
Hi, I'm Ruth.
And I'm Shawn.
And this is the YouTube channel where kids get their inventions made.
We challenged kids to send us their ideas for water crossing contraptions.
And Ruby, who's 7, sent us her idea for a water crossing suit.
So you'll appreciate that that was a little bit flat. And here is an example of a clip from a more recent video.
Hello! We're Ruth and Shawn, and this is Kids Invent Stuff,
The channel where we bring to life invention ideas designed by kids.
So hopefully you see a difference within those two clips. And this is a journey that we are constantly going on. We're constantly thinking about how we film things better, how we edit things better, how we talk and present our ideas and our thoughts, and how we structure that story. So this really is an area where practice makes perfect. And the more you do this, the more you engage with STEM engagement, the more you get involved, the better you'll become. And I think this is the thing that we've learned, is that actually when we are enthusiastic, when we smile, when we make eye contact, when we're enthusiastic about something, then that is when our message gets across the most effectively.
And particularly when you're dealing with young people, ultimately having an example of someone who is just excited about their thing they're communicating to them, that makes everyone excited, and particularly for small kids, that's a really, really powerful way of kind of getting a message across and engaging with people and engaging with the public as a whole.
So a massive thank you to RS Grassroots for supporting this workshop. We are actually going to, over on DesignSpark, we're going to write an article all around this, and there'll be a chance for you to ask your questions. So feel free to ask them either here or on the DesignSpark article, and we'll try and answer as many of those as we can.
And good luck with all your STEM engagement projects moving forwards.
Kids invent stuff.